There was a time when a handshake meant something, when a promise was sacred, when a man's word was his bond. But what happened on Family Feud on a Tuesday afternoon in November 2024 would restore your faith in human decency. When Steve Harvey saw what 68-year-old Robert Mitchell was carrying in his jacket pocket, even the legendary host couldn't hold back his tears. What happened next proved that some debts can never truly be repaid, but they can be honored. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel, because you won't want to miss stories like this that remind us what truly matters in life. The studio lights blazed bright that afternoon. Two families stood on opposite sides of the iconic Family Feud stage. The atmosphere was electric with the usual game show energy. Audience members clapped rhythmically, waiting for the next round to begin. But nobody in that studio, not the crew who had worked hundreds of episodes, not the production team who had seen every possible game show scenario, and certainly not Steve Harvey himself, could have anticipated what was about to unfold. Robert Mitchell stood at the podium representing the Mitchell family from Richmond, Virginia. At 68 years old, he was older than most Family Feud contestants. His silver hair was neatly combed. His navy blue suit, though clearly not expensive, was pressed to perfection. His hands, weathered and calloused from decades of manual labor, gripped the podium with a gentle firmness. But it was his eyes that told the real story. They carried a weight that went beyond the nervous excitement of a game show appearance. Robert Mitchell had not planned to be on Family Feud. In fact, he had resisted the idea when his daughter Sandra first suggested it 6 months earlier. Game shows seemed frivolous to a man who had spent 47 years working construction, building homes for other people while struggling to keep his own family housed and fed. But Sandra had been insistent. She had seen something in her father lately. A heaviness, a sadness that no amount of family dinners or grandchildren's laughter could fully lift. What Sandra didn't know, what nobody in the family knew, was the secret Robert had been carrying for 53 years. In his jacket pocket, wrapped carefully in tissue paper that had yellowed with age, was a letter. The envelope was addressed in handwriting that had faded but was still legible. Inside was a single page, the edges worn soft from being unfolded and refolded countless times over 5 decades. Robert had grown up in the hardscrabble neighborhoods of South Richmond in the 1960s. His father had died when Robert was just 9 years old, leaving his mother to raise 5 children on a seamstress salary. They had nothing. Some weeks, dinner was flour biscuits and whatever vegetables the neighbors shared from their gardens. Robert wore shoes 2 sizes too small because they couldn't afford new ones. He watched his mother's hands crack and bleed from endless hours bent over her sewing machine, working by lamplight long after her children had gone to bed. When Robert was 15, he met a teacher who would change his life. Mr. James Patterson taught mathematics at the segregated high school Robert attended. But Mr. Patterson saw something in the quiet boy who sat in the back row, the one whose stomach sometimes growled during class, because he had skipped lunch to save the few cents for his younger siblings. Mr. Patterson started staying after school with Robert, tutoring him for free, pushing him to see beyond the limitations that poverty had constructed around his world. But it wasn't just the academics. Mr. Patterson did something that Robert had never experienced before. He treated Robert like he mattered, like his future was worth investing in. When Robert's shoes finally fell apart completely, Mr. Patterson showed up at their house with a new pair. When Robert couldn't afford the textbooks, Mr. Patterson bought them. When Robert got accepted to a community college but had no way to pay for it, Mr. Patterson worked extra jobs for an entire year to save enough money for Robert's first-year tuition. Mr. Patterson made Robert promise him something. He made Robert swear that he would finish his education, that he would build a good life, and that when he could, he would help someone else the way he had been helped. Robert had promised. He had meant it with every fiber of his teenage heart, but life had other plans. 3 months into his first semester of college, Robert's mother had a stroke. With no one else to provide for his 4 younger siblings, Robert dropped out. He took a job in construction, working 12-hour days, 6 days a week. He never went back to school. The years rolled forward with the relentless momentum of survival. He married young, had children, worked hard, and gave his family everything he could. But he never forgot his promise to Mr. Patterson. Mr. Patterson had passed away 23 years ago. Robert had attended the funeral, standing in the back of the church, weeping quietly. He had failed the one man who had believed in him. He had broken his promise. And for 23 years, that failure had eaten at him like a slow, burning fire. The letter in Robert's pocket was the last thing Mr. Patterson had ever written to him. It had arrived 1 week before Mr. Patterson's death. In it, the elderly teacher had written about how proud he was of Robert, how he knew that life had been difficult, how he understood that sometimes circumstances prevent us from keeping promises the way we intended. But Mr. Patterson had added one final request. He asked Robert to remember that it was never too late to help someone, that the promise could still be kept, even if it looked different than they had originally imagined. The game had been progressing normally. The Mitchell family was playing well, their teamwork evident in the way they supported each other through right and wrong answers alike. Steve Harvey, in his element, was delivering his trademark reactions, making the audience laugh, keeping the energy high. Then came the moment that would change everything. It was fast money time. Robert's daughter Sandra had gone first, scoring 148 points, solid, respectable. That meant Robert needed only 52 points to win the $20,000. Steve approached Robert with his characteristic warmth. But as he got closer, he noticed something different about this contestant. Robert's hands were shaking slightly. There was a moisture in his eyes that went beyond game show nerves. "Robert, you ready for this?" Steve asked, his voice carrying that perfect blend of encouragement and excitement that had made him one of television's most beloved hosts. Robert nodded slowly. "Mr. Harvey, I've been ready for this for 53 years. Steve paused. That wasn't the typical response. There was something in Robert's voice, something heavy, something that made the seasoned host's instincts tell him that this was going to be more than just another game. 53 years. That's a long time to be ready for fast money, Steve said, trying to lighten the moment while acknowledging that something deeper was happening. Robert managed a small smile. "Not for the game, sir. For something else. But I'll explain after. Let's play." Steve nodded and began the rapid-fire questions. The clock started. "Name something you might find in a wallet." "Cash," Robert answered without hesitation. "Name a reason you might be late to work." "Traffic." "Name something people do to relax." "Read a book." "Name a place where you have to be quiet." "Library." Steve delivered the fifth and final question, his voice carried across the studio with perfect game show cadence. "Name something you wish you could change about your past." The question hung in the air. For most contestants, this would be answered quickly. A job decision, a relationship choice, an investment opportunity, but Robert froze, his mouth opened slightly, then closed, his eyes focused on something far beyond the studio lights. The seconds ticked by. The buzzer that indicated time running out would sound any moment. Robert's lips moved. His answer was barely audible, so quiet that Steve had to lean in to hear it. "Not keeping my promise to the man who saved my life." The buzzer sounded. Time was up. But something in the studio had shifted. The audience, which normally would have been cheering or reacting loudly, had gone completely silent. They had heard Robert's answer. The raw pain in those 9 words had cut through the game show atmosphere like a knife through cloth. Steve stood motionless for a moment. In his decades of hosting, he had developed an instinct for when something real was breaking through the entertainment. This was one of those moments. "Robert," Steve said gently, "I heard your answer, but before we reveal these results, I think you need to tell us what you meant by that." The production team looked uncertain. This wasn't following the usual format. But Steve Harvey's word on his show was final. He wasn't moving forward until he understood what was happening. Robert's daughter Sandra stepped forward from where the family had been standing. She looked confused. She had never heard her father mention any broken promise. Robert reached into his jacket pocket and carefully pulled out the aged envelope. His hands were trembling as he held it. "Mr. Harvey, when I was 15 years old, I had nothing. My family had nothing. A teacher named James Patterson saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. He tutored me. He bought me shoes. He paid for my textbooks. He saved money for an entire year to send me to college. The studio remained silent. Even the crew members who should have been checking cameras and adjusting lights had stopped their work. Everyone was listening. He made me promise him something. Robert continued, his voice breaking. He made me promise that when I could, I would help someone else the way he helped me, that I would pay it forward. I promised him I would. Robert paused, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. But I had to drop out of college after 3 months. My mother got sick. I had 4 younger siblings. I had to work. I never went back to school. I spent 47 years in construction. I built a good life. I raised good children. But I never kept my promise to Mr. Patterson. He died 23 years ago, and I never kept my promise. Steve's own eyes were glistening now. The camera operators were wiping tears from their faces, trying to keep their shots steady. This letter, Robert held up the envelope, is the last thing he ever wrote to me. It came 1 week before he died. He told me it was never too late, that the promise could still be kept. But how do I keep a promise to a man who's been gone for 23 years? Sandra was crying openly now. She had never known this story. Her father, the quiet man who had always provided for them, who had always been there, had been carrying this burden for her entire life. ACT4 THE2 RNEROUNDs 12-16 minutes. Steve Harvey made a decision in that moment that would become one of the most talked about moments in Family Feud history. He turned to the production team. We're going to reveal these answers. But before we do, I want to say something. He turned back to Robert. Sir, you have been keeping that promise. Every single day of your life. Robert looked up, confusion mixing with the grief on his face. You dropped out of school to take care of your family. Steve continued, his voice thick with emotion. You worked construction for 47 years to make sure your children had what you didn't have. You raised them with values and love. You showed them what sacrifice looks like. That is keeping the promise. Steve turned to address the audience and the cameras. Mr. Patterson didn't invest in Robert just so Robert could go to college. He invested in Robert so Robert would be the kind of man who puts others first, and that's exactly what Robert became. The audience erupted in applause. But Steve raised his hand. He wasn't finished. Now let's see how you did on these answers, because I have a feeling about this. They began to reveal the results. Cash for something in a wallet. Number 1 answer. Traffic for being late to work. Number 1 answer. Read a book for something people do to relax. Number 1 answer. Library for a place to be quiet. Number 1 answer. 4 number 1 answers. The audience was on their feet now. The Mitchell family was crying and celebrating simultaneously. They had already won. But there was still one answer left. Steve looked at Robert. You know what you said for that last question? The question about what you wish you could change about your past. You said you wished you could change not keeping your promise to the man who saved your life. Robert nodded, fresh tears streaming down his face. Well, Steve said, I'm about to tell you something that might change how you see that answer. He paused for dramatic effect, but there was nothing manufactured about the emotion in the room. That answer, not keeping my promise. Survey says. The board revealed it. Number 1 answer. 39 points. The studio exploded 5 perfect number 1 answers. It had only been done once before in the history of the show. Robert had just tied the record. But Robert wasn't celebrating. He had collapsed to his knees sobbing. Not tears of joy for the game. These were 53 years of grief and guilt pouring out of him. Steve knelt beside him, putting his hand on Robert's shoulder. Robert, listen to me. You got 5 perfect answers because you answered honestly from your heart. And that last answer. Do you know why it was the number 1 answer? Robert looked up, unable to speak. Because every good person wishes they could do more. Steve said. Every person who was helped by someone wishes they could fully repay that debt. The fact that this was the number 1 answer proves that you are exactly the kind of person Mr. Patterson believed you to be. Sandra rushed forward, embracing her father. The rest of the Mitchell family joined them in a group hug. The audience was cheering and crying simultaneously. But Steve Harvey wasn't done. He had one more move to make. Robert, you won $20,000 today. That money is yours. Your family earned it. But I want to ask you something. Robert stood up, supported by his daughter, wiping his face with the handkerchief Steve had handed him. "What would you do with that money if you could truly honor Mr. Patterson's memory?" Without hesitation, Robert answered, "I would find a kid like I was, someone who has nothing but potential, someone who needs help, and I would give them what Mr. Patterson gave me, a chance." Steve nodded slowly. "Then that's exactly what we're going to help you do." The episode aired 3 weeks later. The response was unprecedented. Within 48 hours, the clip had been viewed over 50 million times across social media platforms. News outlets picked up the story, but more importantly, something beautiful began to happen. People who had been helped by teachers, mentors, coaches, or kind strangers started sharing their stories. The hashtag #FatePaidForwardForPatterson began trending. But beyond the social media attention, real action was taking place. Steve Harvey kept his word. He worked with Robert to establish the James Patterson Educational Fund. Robert contributed the entire $20,000 from Family Feud, but that was just the beginning. Steve's foundation matched it. Then viewers started donating. Within 1 month, the fund had grown to over $300,000. But the most remarkable part was what Robert did next. At 68 years old, when most people were thinking about retirement, Robert started volunteering at the same high school he had attended over 50 years ago. Every day after his construction shift ended, he would go to the school and tutor students. Kids from struggling families, kids who reminded him of himself at 15. The first student Robert helped was a young man named Marcus Thompson, 15 years old, father in prison, mother working 3 jobs, brilliant mind, no resources. Marcus was the same age Robert had been when Mr. Patterson had first invested in him. Robert saw himself in Marcus immediately. He started tutoring him in math. He bought him new shoes when Marcus's fell apart. He helped him apply for scholarships. And when Marcus got accepted to college but couldn't afford to go, the James Patterson Educational Fund covered his entire first year. But Robert did something else. He gave Marcus the letter, the yellowed, worn letter that Mr. Patterson had written 53 years ago. "Read this," Robert told Marcus. "This letter has carried me through 53 years. It reminded me that it's never too late to keep a promise. Now I'm passing it to you. Not the paper itself, you can give that back to me. But the promise. When you help someone else, you keep this going." Marcus read the letter with tears streaming down his face. He understood immediately the sacred chain he was being invited to join. 6 months after the episode aired, Family Feud did a follow-up segment. Steve Harvey traveled to Richmond, Virginia, to see what had happened to Robert Mitchell and the James Patterson Educational Fund. The segment began with footage from Robert's original appearance, reminding viewers of that extraordinary moment when the studio had fallen silent. Then the camera cut to present day. The James Patterson Educational Fund had grown to over $1 million through donations from people across the country who had been moved by the story. The fund had helped 23 students in its first 6 months. Some received full scholarships. Others received help with books, supplies, or tutoring. Each one was paired with a mentor from the community who committed to providing not just financial support but personal investment, just as Mr. Patterson had done for Robert. But the most beautiful part of the update was seeing Robert and Marcus together. The cameras followed them as they worked side by side, tutoring other students. Marcus, who had struggled in math just months before, was now helping younger kids with algebra. The cycle was continuing. Steve Harvey interviewed both of them. When he asked Marcus what Robert's help had meant to him, the young man's answer was simple and profound. "Mr. Robert gave me more than money or tutoring. He gave me something to live up to. He showed me that when someone helps you, you don't just take it and move on. You become part of something bigger. You become a link in a chain of goodness that goes back generations and will continue forward for generations more." Steve then turned to Robert. "How does it feel, knowing that you kept your promise to Mr. Patterson?" Robert was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "I still wish he was here to see this. I still wish I could have kept my original promise the way I intended to. But I understand now what he was trying to teach me in that last letter. He wasn't asking me to pay him back. He was asking me to pay it forward. And now, Every time I see Marcus helping another student, every time I see one of these kids light up because they finally understand a math problem or because someone believed in them, I feel Mr. Patterson smiling." The camera then showed something that made Steve Harvey visibly emotional. On the wall of the school's main hallway was a plaque. It read, "The James Patterson Memorial Wall of Promise Keepers." Beneath the title were photographs and brief biographies of every student who had been helped by the fund. But it didn't stop there. Each student who received help was asked to write a promise. Their promise to help someone else when they could. The promises were displayed beneath each photo. Simple statements. "I will mentor a younger student. I will volunteer at the community center. I will remember where I came from and help others rise." These weren't just feel-good words. The fund tracked each student and helped facilitate their future giving. The chain was being forged with intention and purpose. Steve's final comment in the segment became widely quoted. Robert Mitchell walked onto the Family Feud stage carrying 53 years of what he thought was broken promise. He walked off having started a movement. That's the power of honesty. That's the power of keeping faith with those who believed in us. And that's what happens when one answer changes everything. The impact rippled far beyond Richmond. Schools across the country started their own Promise Keeper programs, inspired by Robert's story. Teachers who had helped struggling students decades ago began receiving letters from their former students, thanking them and pledging to continue the cycle of giving. One particularly moving story emerged from Detroit, where a 72-year-old retired teacher named Helen Brooks had watched Robert's Family Feud episode. She had spent 40 years teaching in one of Detroit's most challenging neighborhoods. She had helped countless students, but had never known what happened to most of them after they graduated. After seeing Robert's story, she wrote a simple post on social media. "If I ever helped you when you were a student, I want you to know I'm proud of you. And if you're now in a position to help someone else, that would be the greatest gift you could give me." Within 2 weeks, over 300 former students had responded. They shared stories of how Mrs. Brooks had helped them, how she had paid for their field trips when they couldn't afford it, how she had stayed late to tutor them, how she had believed in them when no one else did. But more than just sharing stories, these former students organized. They created the Helen Brooks Scholarship Fund. Within 1 month, they had raised enough money to send 5 students from Mrs. Brooks's former school to college. Mrs. Brooks was invited on to Steve Harvey's talk show, where she met some of her former students for the first time in decades. The reunion was broadcast to millions and sparked yet another wave of people reaching out to teachers and mentors who had helped them. 2 years after Robert's appearance on Family Feud, the James Patterson Educational Fund had helped over 100 students. Marcus Thompson had graduated high school with honors and received a full scholarship to Virginia Commonwealth University, where he was studying education. His goal was to become a teacher and return to his community. The Promise Keeper movement had expanded beyond education. People in business started mentoring young entrepreneurs. Doctors started programs to help aspiring medical students from low-income backgrounds. The fundamental principle was always the same: someone helped me, now I help someone else, and I ask them to continue the chain. Robert Mitchell continued working in construction, though he reduced his hours to spend more time tutoring. On the day of his 70th birthday, the community held a celebration in his honor. Over 200 people attended, including all the students he had helped through the James Patterson Educational Fund. During the celebration, Sandra stood up to speak about her father. She revealed something that brought the entire room to tears. "My father carried Mr. Patterson's letter in his pocket every single day for 23 years, she said. "After he appeared on Family Feud, I asked him if he was going to keep carrying it. He told me no. He said he didn't need to carry it anymore because now he was living it." She held up a new letter, written in Robert's own handwriting. Instead, he wrote his own letter. "A letter to Marcus and to every student the fund helps. This is what it says to the young person reading this. Someone once believed in me when I had nothing but potential. They invested their time, their money, and their faith in me. I spent 53 3 years thinking I had failed them because circumstances prevented me from keeping my promise the way I had intended. But I learned that a promise is not about the exact path you take. It's about the destination you reach and the people you bring with you. I promise to help you, not because I'm rich or powerful, but because someone once helped me, and I ask you to make me a promise in return. When you can, when your time comes, help someone else. Keep this chain going. That's how we honor those who helped us, not by paying them back, but by paying it forward. With faith in your future, Robert Mitchell. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Steve Harvey, who had flown in to surprise Robert for his birthday, stood up to speak. He had become close with the Mitchell family over the 2 years since the episode aired. Robert, when you stood at that podium and answered that 5th question, you thought you were confessing a failure. But what you actually did was issue a challenge to everyone watching. You challenged us to think about the promises we've made, the debts we owe, the people who helped us. And you showed us that it's never too late to honor those who believed in us. Steve paused, clearly emotional. I've been in this business for over 30 years. I've given away millions of dollars in prize money. I've seen thousands of contestants. But what you started that day goes beyond any prize money. You started a movement of gratitude and action. You turned personal pain into community gain. And you proved that one honest answer can change not just your life, but thousands of lives. The celebration continued late into the evening, with stories being shared about Mr. Patterson, about Robert, about the students who had been helped, and about the future being built one promise at a time. 3 years after his Family Feud appearance, Robert Mitchell received an invitation that would mark the culmination of his journey. He was invited to give the commencement address at Virginia Commonwealth University, Marcus Thompson's college. The title of his speech, The Promise That Never Ends. Standing before thousands of graduates and their families, Robert shared his story. He talked about being a 15-year-old boy with holes in his shoes. He talked about Mr. Patterson's kindness. He talked about the 53 years of carrying guilt. And he talked about learning that sometimes the promises we think we've broken are actually just promises we haven't finished keeping yet. Marcus Thompson sat in the audience, wearing his graduation cap and gown, crying with pride as the man who had changed his life inspired thousands more. Robert's final words became the motto of the Promise Keeper movement. When someone helps you rise, you have 2 choices. You can see it as a debt you'll never fully repay, or you can see it as a seed you're meant to plant in someone else. Choose the seed. Always choose the seed. The standing ovation lasted for 7 minutes. As this remarkable story reaches its conclusion, it is important to note the lasting impact of that single moment on Family Feud. The James Patterson Educational Fund continues to grow and help students. The Promise Keeper movement has chapters in 43 states. Marcus Thompson graduated with honors and returned to Richmond to teach at the same high school where Robert tutored him. Robert Mitchell still tutors students 3 days a week. At 73 years old, he has personally worked with over 300 young people. His legacy is no longer measured by the buildings he constructed during his 47 years in the trade, but by the futures he has helped build through education and mentorship. Steve Harvey keeps in regular contact with Robert. He often tells the story of Robert's appearance on Family Feud during his motivational speaking engagements, always emphasizing that the most powerful moments in television happen when people are brave enough to be vulnerable and honest. The letter Robert wrote, the one Sandra read at his 70th birthday party, has been framed and hangs in the main office of every Promise Keeper chapter. It serves as a reminder that gratitude is not a feeling to be kept private, but an action to be shared publicly. And somewhere, perhaps, James Patterson's spirit smiles, because the 15-year-old boy he believed in over 50 years ago has proven that acts of kindness never truly end. They echo forward through time, multiplying with each generation, creating waves of positive change that extend far beyond what any single person could imagine. Robert kept his promise, not the way he originally intended, but in a way far more powerful. He showed that it is never too late to honor those who believed in us. And in doing so, he inspired millions to do the same. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that it's never too late to keep a promise, never too late to make a difference, and never too late to honor those who believed in us. Because sometimes, one answer really does change everything.